We all know at this point that connection is necessary for healing. And I know for most people, by far, the idea of connection, what it means, how to achieve it, can feel really elusive and sometimes really impossible, certainly anxiety provoking. And there is an aspect of our experience that really leads to that. And today I want to talk about just some of the underlying things that can happen and how to navigate them a little bit. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. So, of course, I talk about connection all the time, and I have talked about attachment issues previously as well. But today I want to talk in particular about how attachment, in particular, a couple different forms of attachment styles, and connection combine, collide, and can create some difficulty. So, in particular, for people that have experienced childhood trauma, anxious attachment and fearful avoidant attachment are the most kind of common and certainly problematic ways of attachment that we develop, in terms of the impact that it ends up having on how we experience things and the fears that we hold on to, and how we can take things as confirmation of those fears. So, we've talked about all of this to some degree in some capacity previously, but again, I'm kind of wanting to combine them. So I'm not going to get into the specific attachment styles themselves a whole lot, but I want to talk about the kind of the impact, I guess, more so. So I actually made some notes because I didn't want to forget anything. It's been one of those weeks. So you might see me looking over here at my note a little bit. But if you have even the idea of connection, if you find yourself having a reaction to that, whether it's rolling your eyes, feeling anxious, maybe even feeling some nausea, that's because of the fear, because even just regular old anxiety has an aspect of fear or worry behind it. So much of this is related to fear. Sometimes the fear is very obvious and conscious in our mind, and sometimes we're not necessarily afraid or aware that we're afraid of anything really at all. In fact, as part of our facade, part of the mask, we may appear as though we're not afraid of anything. We may tell ourselves that we're not afraid. But if this is a part of your experience and the way that you kind of think about or explore or experience relationships, then it is definitely there. So, a few things that I wanted to kind of address, and then I'm going to explore a little bit more. For, in particular, anxious attachment, and I think the fearful avoidant kind of, there's a lot of overlap here in the way that I'm going to talk about it today. So with anxious attachment, we recognize kind of the resistance that we might have or the fears that we might have. But part of the reason that we have those fears is because we have a desire, we have a hope, we have even maybe an intuitive instinct for more, but that fear is holding us back. And so when we think about the idea of being vulnerable and connecting, and so in particular, I'm talking about the kind of connection where you feel safe in being able to share some vulnerable things. Doesn't necessarily have to be your entire history, but even just like I'm having a really hard time at work or something like that, but it feels very vulnerable to you. So when there are things going on, we naturally, as human beings, have this drive and even a bit of an instinct for connection, for community. And so there's a part of us that wants, maybe more from a need that is just instinctual. And some of us, it might be more conscious in wanting somebody to listen, to acknowledge, to validate, those types of things. So on one level, we can crave that connection. We can crave the acceptance. We can crave the physical proximity, whatever it might be. And yet this fearful part of us, which ultimately is the wounded part of us, the fearful part is saying, no, absolutely not. And I've talked about this before in regards to kind of that self-protective aspect kicking in and trying to hold you back to keep you safe. So that fear is saying it's not a good idea, you can't trust people, people are going to leave you, you know, all of those things might be relatable, but sometimes you might tend to go in a particular direction and the thoughts might be more specific around that type of fear. So specifically like rejection or somebody just not believing you, like those are different thought patterns, but ultimately they leave us kind of at the same place. So we can crave, need, even have the desire that we recognize of having some closeness or connection, maybe emotional or even physical. And I'm not necessarily talking about sex, but that could be it as well. But yet we're afraid. And we can also notice that we have fear. Like if we were to put ourselves out there, we can have this fear of being judged or being rejected. And we don't even necessarily have to know exactly in our conscious thinking what that means or what it looks like. It's just this kind of ingrained experience that we hold on to. And when people recognize that they might have this desire to be accepted, to be close, to be supported, people, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say this, but then it makes people feel or believe and sometimes therefore reaffirm that they're weak, that they're needy, that they shouldn't need other people's support or connection even. And so it really creates this kind of cycle of thought process and therefore experience that makes it incredibly challenging to feel safe, to be able to be vulnerable, to share, to ask. And even just the ability to recognize within ourselves what we want or what we think we might need, that is really challenging. I think for probably every survivor I've ever known, that is challenging. Now, the degree to which it's challenging may vary, and it can even vary as an individual day to day, depending on what's going on in your life. But to some degree, that is something that most people tend to struggle with. Being able to acknowledge that to somebody else, that brings on like a whole other level of vulnerability and fear, and therefore the need to self-protect. So balancing this desire, this need that we have as humans with feeling the natural feelings that tend to come up, the self-protection, the fear, even ideas of being unworthy or undeserving, those things are going to happen. And even when you are sharing with like the right person, like a healthy person, a person that likely is going to respond well to you, even in situations like that, you're likely still going to have these doubts and these fears and even sometimes perceptions of being rejected. And that, I think, is really important to be able to recognize, because sometimes people will think that, well, if I'm feeling uneasy or if I'm having second thoughts about sharing this, then maybe that's my intuition telling me not to do it. And this is a really hard thing to balance. And I will fully acknowledge that. And this is part of the reason why healing is as complex as it is, because generally speaking, with most things, there's a lot of nuance, and we can't necessarily say for most things very clearly that it's yes or no, or right or wrong, or good or bad, or whatever. So sometimes people will think about sharing something, and again, it doesn't even have to be all their trauma, and that anxiety will kick in. The false beliefs, the things that we say to ourselves to reaffirm all the negative things that we believe about ourselves, or the things that we believe in terms of expectations of what people will think, feel, or do. So when that fear comes up, people will think, well, I'm definitely feeling that in my gut, so maybe that's intuition. And I've definitely talked about this before in other videos in terms of kind of how to recognize some things to look for in terms of whether somebody's safe. But as soon as that feeling comes up and somebody has that idea, like maybe this isn't a good idea, whether it's intuition or just, I don't want to do this because it feels bad, because it is often such a kind of strong and certainly familiar feeling, it causes people to pull back. So learning to be able to balance, and I don't even know if it's so much about having to learn to balance, so much as it is learning to trust that you are safe even when these feelings are there. And I think that is a much better way to think about it. And as is the case in so much of healing, until you've experienced it, it seems like it can't possibly exist. So when those types of feelings come in, again, whether it's fear of something bad happening or thinking that you might be rejected or judged, or even having somebody look at you in a particular way or say something that can be interpreted in a way that feels dismissive. And I say it that way specifically because, particularly when we have any sort of anxious or fearful and even avoidant attachment, part of what we do as humans is we anticipate a particular type of outcome or reaction. And so because we anticipate that, whatever the response or reaction is, we can easily, so easily, find a way to interpret that in a way that fits with what that expectation or fear is. And I've had this happen when I've talked to people individually, where there might have been a fear that that I wouldn't get it, that I wouldn't believe them, or that I would think maybe like it's not a big deal or something like that. And while I know that that's not what I thought, they can very easily, as all humans can, people can very easily take something because we're searching for it, right? We're like on guard looking for that thing, because, which doesn't make a lot of sense on a logical level, but remember, emotions are not logic. But will literally like be scanning for something to pick up on that would fit with the expectation they have. So, for example, one thing that happens, and it doesn't just happen with me, it can happen in a lot of circumstances, but like if somebody will share something, and then if you ask a question about it, that is a time when it's very easy for people to think that you didn't get it or you don't believe them. Now, your question could be completely valid and even helpful ultimately, but if there's that expectation there, then people are going to be searching for that. Another way that this shows up a lot is with shame. And if we feel shame around something and we share something with somebody, it doesn't even have to be that thing that we feel a lot of shame around. But if we're feeling any aspect of shame and we share something that feels somewhat vulnerable, maybe seems a little different than what a lot of people might say or something like that. If we're feeling shame, we naturally have an expectation that other people are going to be thinking similarly about us as we are thinking about us. And so even though the other person may say something that is not at all a confirmation of that, because it is an expectation, and because that self-protective part is scanning for danger constantly, it will find any tiny thing. I'm not going to say that it makes anything up, because I don't believe that that is true. But it will take a change in position, a blink that's a little too long, or a tone like that. It seems like the tone is different when they speak again. Looking away for a second, not responding immediately, or responding immediately. My point is, and I hope that you're understanding, is that it doesn't matter, even if it objectively can look like the best possible scenario. When you are in that fearful state, particularly when you're not feeling good about yourself, that is what is naturally going to happen. So being able to trust, and trust is a practice. You're not just going to make a decision to trust. You literally have to continue to be mindful about creating opportunities where your trust can be explored and you can recognize that it is in fact safe. So being aware of how that process can unfold, where we can take anything as kind of personally, in a sense, being able to, in that learning to trust yourself process, thinking about noticing how you're feeling. Is there anything that you are taking from? So any meaning that you're attaching to the experience that doesn't feel so good? Is there anything about it that maybe isn't the full picture? This is how we build that sense of safety within ourselves, how we begin to create experiences in which we can retrain our nervous system to go from being anxious or fearful or avoidant to feeling secure in our interaction. So not just attachment, but feeling secure and therefore free in our interactions with people. And again, this could be something that is, somebody that you've just met and you're having a pretty simple conversation with, to building really deep friendships or partnerships with somebody. It is ultimately about trust, trusting first in yourself and trusting in somebody else. And while I say first in yourself, I do think that it kind of, there has to be some level of being willing to feel vulnerable, trusting that you're going to be okay, trusting that it will be okay. Generally speaking, I think a little bit of that is going to be somewhat necessary most of the time. I think that's true. There might be some caveats to that, but you can only build real trust, deep trust within yourself by giving yourself experiences in which you allow trust to build with other people. Because if you don't give yourself those opportunities, and I know I've talked about this before, but if you don't give yourself those opportunities to practice and have positive experiences, then it's all theoretical and likely going to be thought of as bull. You're not going to believe it. So it's kind of this chicken and egg thing where you can't fully build the trust in yourself until you've recognized that the people that you choose to share with, or how you choose to share, or how you're able to talk yourself through by reality testing somebody's reaction or how it went or whatever, you're not going to be able to build the trust that you need within yourself. And then, of course, that helps you recognize that you can build trust in other people too. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that everybody that you come across or share something with, that you're going to trust them with everything. And there are going to be people in your life that you trust with some things, and some people that you don't trust with much, some people that you trust very deeply with certain areas potentially. And even though this person over here you might trust a lot with some things, you may not trust them with other things. And that is natural. That is completely natural and normal. And you can build healthy, beautiful relationships based on that. As long as, and this is, I think, important, so you can build the healthy, fulfilling relationships with that, as long as you do not feel the need to hide. So that's one thing to choose not to share certain things. And I've talked about before how I have had friends that I have chosen not to share certain things with. But recognizing why you're choosing not to share. And it can be that, well, this friend isn't really the person that I would go to about that, or this friend doesn't really have interest or doesn't really get this thing, so this isn't something I would really talk to them about. I might tell them that, I'm kind of struggling with this thing, but I may not go into any detail or look to that person for a lot of support. But this person over here might be the person that you go to about that specific thing, but maybe you wouldn't necessarily go to them about something else. And maybe that other thing is going out and having a great time. Maybe this person is the person that you tend to connect with more deeply about things, and the two of you can have a conversation for hours on end. So they can both be really fulfilling and healthy, but it's not all or nothing. And that is the reality for most people, and I would even say most healthy relationships. Now, it's possible you may have a friend where you feel like you can talk about everything with, and if so, I am so very happy for you. But recognizing, are there things that you wouldn't necessarily share? And it's okay as long as you're not feeling like it's that you have shame around it, because that's some work that you need to do, or it's that this person is kind of judgmental or something like that. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't be friends and talk about certain things, but just recognizing that that may not be a thing that you talk about with them. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about what I've shared, and like I said, I know that I've talked about some of these things probably many times before, but depending on where you're at and depending on the context in which I'm speaking about it, how I talk about it can be a little bit different. So let me know if you've got thoughts or questions in the comments, and I'd love for you to share. Did you find yourself relating to anything that I talked about? I know connection is hard. I know it's scary. I also know, and I know that so many of you also recognize this, that the difference it makes in our lived experiences day to day is part of what the freedom is that I talk about when it comes to healing. And of course, you and we all deserve to feel connected, to feel supported, to feel valued. I'd love to know what came up for you. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time.